Alexander Romero, hello. You were just thinking about me? Incredible. Oh my god, manifesto break time? Is he still going at it? I was watching a little bit of that earlier. But I'm just gonna watch it all on like 2 times speed. Wash Manifesto soy. I had cameos in it, really? I remember talking to Destiny while he was writing the manifesto, specifically the trans section. I remember him being like, what do you think of this? And me being like, that's so true. Also, I'm pretty sure I had friends who like emailed him about it. Did he officially nix the Twitter deal? I think he was planning to for a while. Whoa. Okay. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're gonna have a conversation with like a very, I think, left-wing progressive Democrat guy. Listen, contrast editing. Tune in to the manifesto. I support this. I need to work on creating a link tree. I think I'm also going to create a second Twitter account. And the second Twitter account's going to be more for like politics stuff. Not right now, babe. Destiny just released his manifesto. But yeah, I'm definitely going to watch that. Just, I'd prefer to watch the Destiny manifesto in 2 times speed. He's going to be reading it for a while. It's a long manifesto. Oof. 35,000 words. So many words. Mm. I might hop out of the stream and come back. I think I'm gonna get cough drops because my throat hurts again. So I'll be back. Yeah, I disappeared. Yeah, my YouTube extension also goes up to like 3 times quite often. Some people just speak so slowly. It's insane. Wow, you love me? You should give me all of your money. I do watch Destiny at a very high speed. Like they're the 1940s cinema. What does that mean? What does that mean? I did not know that. Cough drop. Amazing. Wait, hold on. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm messing around with my audio settings. I don't know. They're not cooperating. It's very tragic. All I want is to rapidly consume this cough drop so I can be peak efficiency. Some of the most riveting Twitch content out there, I know. But soon, we'll start being entertaining. My YouTube is also just half-tash. I agree. I prefer the YouTube player. I think sunships are the leading recession indicator, yeah. Everything else pales in comparison to the sunships metric. Mm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'll be back. Whoa, I have returned. All right, I think we're going to call this guy and talk to him, hear out his opinions.
Hey, Toph, can you hear me?
Yo, I can't.
Perfect.
What's up? How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
Nice. I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Sorry, this is the first time I just relocated states, and this is like the first time I've set everything up for a conversation.
Nice, yeah. It took me a while to find like a good setup, but I'm liking like the green screen thing right now.
It is. Oh, you mean that's not your actual view?
It's not, I wish. Lived
Oh,
in like a little animated Northwest Pacific atmosphere.
well, it's a nice ambiance. It's a nice touch.
I think so.
My problem is I'm not very tech savvy,
Mm.
like at all, and I thought it was just going to be a simple matter of uh, start a video chat with you, then fire up Streamlabs and just click like record of the screen. And the camera was like, no, fuck that. And so it just like started to de-res, and I was like having a conversation with Streamlabs tech support, and they were like, you're SOL. So I'm not recording any of this. So I'm gonna, like, for posterity's sake, have to go to your recording of it. So
Oh,
I hope you don't
okay.
mind. Yeah.
Big responsibility. It can't, my recording can't mess up or whatever
It
for
is.
both of
It's got to
us.
be perfect. This is my big moment.
Okay.
So
I'll try not to disappoint you.
I don't think you will. Okay.
Yeah. I just set up like a virtual camera in OBS. That's how I
So
did everything.
so I did that too. Like at the recommendations of some friends, they were like, "Okay, we need to set up a virtual camera." And again, I don't know. So like, I don't know what webcam or whatever that you're using, but I'm using like a Sony ZV something or another, and I probably just don't have it set up right. But
Mm.
even the virtual thing isn't working for me. So
Yeah.
it's just user error.
I think you'll just have to, I don't know, try it. Or I don't know what the term is. You'll have to trial
Trial
and
and
error
error.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely
Politics, man.
appreciate this. Yeah.
What did you want to talk about?
So a lot actually. So for your audience, I go by rum1n8. I am a fledgling streamer. I'm mostly active on TikTok these days. I need to blow the dust off my YouTube channel. I would say politically, I am progressive in aspiration, but a Democrat by pragmatism, because I recognize we're in a duopoly and it's either that or the Republican Party. And I'm full steam ahead on Democrats. They're the closest thing to what I want to achieve. But the thing that I want to talk to you about is kind of like my overall thesis here lately, which is that I think the most important thing that a morally responsible, and especially a morally responsible eligible voter in the United States can do is vote Democrat and do their part to keep the Republicans out of power, because I think the Republican Party is the single biggest political threat, not only to the country, but through the country, since we're the world's only superpower, the rest of the planet. And I've had conversations with a David Pakman correspondent named Luke Beasley, with Destiny, and trying to set something up with Not So Erudite and you. And basically my goal is to try to reach out to the people I consider to be more centrist or moderate, and try to get them on board, both on the left-leaning centrist side and the right-leaning centrist side, which I understand you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be a short conversation because you may be completely on board, or it may be the longest conversation ever because we are on diametric opposites. But that's like the broad topic, and we can talk about rhetoric and policy and specific incidents and the Supreme Court cases and all that stuff. So,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see much like reason at present to vote for the Democratic Party. I'm not. Yeah, I don't even see like. I don't know what issues they represent me on particularly.
okay.
So you could like start making a pitch, and I'll go with that.
Well, I guess so. It's interesting. So, I think there are two ways to look at it. You can make an affirmative case for Democrats, which I think is doable, but not as easy to do as the I don't know what the opposite of affirmative is, but like the negative, the polemic case for Republicans. So I'm familiar. So backtracking a bit, I'm familiar with your work from the Hippy Dippy,
Mm-hmm.
your appearances on Hippy Dippy, and your conversations with Destiny and Vosh.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand you are both an American citizen and a voter, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And did you vote, if you don't mind me asking, did you vote Republican in 2020?
I voted for Biden.
Really?
Yeah.
The plot thickens. That was so. So tell me about the finest vote that you ever made.
Well,
that one.
yeah, I've only made one vote because I'm 21 right now. So
Oh, gotcha.
2016, I was too young to vote. I think that Republicans massively fumbled, and libertarians, really like everyone on the right in America, fumbled COVID. And I think that COVID is like one of these issues that is just like should not be at the whims of kind of like populism or like populist rhetoric. And it really, I don't think it matters what like the average person thinks about what COVID policy should be. I think there's like an objectively right answer. And so I was pretty frustrated with like a lot of the refusal to engage with reality, both on, you know, the right and the left, like the left's, you know, insistence on like mask wearing to the point of absurdity, and the right's like anti-vax rhetoric, and sort of like alternative medicine rhetoric, which I think was both like really destructive. And so I think that like the best COVID policy really would have been like serious lockdowns in the beginning until the development of the vaccine. And then you roll out the vaccine and then you open things up, right? Once, you know, deaths from COVID are going to plummet. The inevitable reality is that everyone's going to get COVID. And if you try to pursue these like zero COVID policies, like you see in China, the only way you do that was with like extremely strict authoritarian lockdown controls.
Which this country is just not capable of because of
Yeah.
federalism.
Yeah, and this country is not capable of that, for one. And then two, like, this country has like an insistence on like sort of liberty, even to the point of like extremity when it no longer makes sense. So yeah, that was kind of my position on that, and I was really frustrated with Trump. I think that Trump had a lot of promises early on in his presidency where he said that like he would do all of these things. He would like shake up the political organization. He would, deal with corruption in the White House and in Washington. And those things didn't happen. So I think Trump kind of proved himself to be this narcissistic, like incompetent fool who was really just in it for like the political pageantry and for the esteem and aspiration. And so he didn't really prove to have any like meaningful like policies or political will. So
Right.
I frustrated with his COVID response, and then also with his inability to do anything. I figured that, well, I'd rather just have like a Democrat who's going to be like competent on COVID than a Republican that's going to be incompetent and then also do nothing. And that was kind of my decision there.
So was it, just to clarify, I mean, and I appreciate you laying that out, did you vote Democrat to punish Trump for his incompetence on COVID, or simply to not put him in a position to continue it? Or both?
I guess like a bit of both. I don't know. I think that like looking back, I don't know if that was like necessarily the right decision there. Because I think that like maybe an interesting counterfactual would be like Trump wins the election and then like takes credit for the vaccine, and like more people get vaccinated as a result, and we have an easier time transitioning out of COVID era lockdowns. That might have been the case of what happened, and we might have like, ran the economy less hot and then be dealing with less like repercussions. So obviously when you get into historical counterfactuals, like it's impossible to tell. But I think that like if that was the case, then I think you can look back at my vote and say probably not the best decision in retrospect.
That is an interesting counterfactual, and the implication there, though, is that you would have been rewarding Trump for his incompetence on COVID in that counterfactual.
I mean, I don't really think about it like that. I just think of like,
Well, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, like how can you optimize the country going forward? And like if that were in fact the counterfactual, like that would come true, then it sort of wouldn't matter what happened in the past. Like what matters is that we'd be in a better place now.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess I don't want to spend too long on that, but I think that's a fascinating insight into I guess like your decision making calculus potentially, because the way I look at it is, in that particular counterfactual, you would have been rewarding, even if that wasn't the intent, you would have been rewarding Trump for his incompetence and punishing Democrats for their competence. So in your counterfactual, which we can't prove, and I know you admit to that, but the only way that would have worked is that you could reasonably rely on Democrats to behave competently. They would get vaccinated, they would take the necessary precautions, regardless of who's in office.
Which I think they would do, at least on this COVID issue,
agree.
just because it was like so politicized, and that was the position the left took up. So I think they're going to take that up continually.
I think that's perfectly. I agree. I think that Democrats demonstrated during President Trump's last year in office that, for all the rancor between Democrats and Republicans and Democrats and President Trump, Democrats could be reasonably relied on to put the health of the country before politics, whereas President Trump would not.
No, I don't think so. I think that Democrats engaged in mask wearing and like COVID advocacy and like careful measures because of politics. As like, I don't think that they were really concerned at all with the science. What they were concerned with was like looking good compared to Republicans, and like that happened in this case to align with the science. I think more out of like happenstance than anything. But like you look at how Democrats treated like mask wearing, where like there wasn't, and maybe there's evidence now, but like for up until like a few months ago, and potentially now as well, because I don't know about more research if it's come out, there was no evidence that like cloth masks were an effective deterrent of COVID. There's no evidence for that. And yet like we were sticking to these policies of like enforced mask wearing when really people could just wear cloth masks, dirty cloth masks, and it wouldn't do anything. And yet it became this like symbol of kind of like Democrat competency, when really it was a kind of like smoke and mirrors show of political loyalty.
Well, actually, no. I think even to this day, the CDC. I mean, the last time I checked it a couple of months ago, the CDC says that while like surgical or N95 masks are certainly superior to cloth masks, even a cloth mask is better than no mask whatsoever, and that's CDC
There might
guidelines.
be new data on this, but as far as I know, the largest like studies of it did not show an improvement with cloth masks, as well as there was just like there's a complete lack of like literature as far as like RCT studies on it. But the largest, studies, I believe from Southern Asia, showed that there wasn't a significant improvement. But there
Um,
might be more data. Like I'm willing to like admit that that's possible. But for,
I know, yeah, and things may have changed, and it's entire. I mean, I suppose it's possible that the CDC official guidelines were not reflective of the best studies. Unlikely, but I would concede that that's possible.
well, here's
Um,
the other thing: is that like the CDC and like the Fed does this too, where like they're very aware that what they say is being like hyper analyzed. So like
sure.
here's the thing: when you like tell people to wear cloth masks, and like people wear cloth masks, sometimes that can cause them to be more conscious of health and like more willing to wash their hands, more willing to stay 6 feet apart from people. And those things might have like real effects, right? That's like possible. And these are like confounding variables. And so I think that the CDC kind of figured, maybe reasonably, that if you get people to wear cloth masks, even if the cloth masks themselves, don't do anything, they're not going to harm people, and they might have this alternative benefit of like causing people to be more health conscious.
Yeah, so I mean, and that may be like some sort of like broader, psychological effect, but I am looking at, and I can send you the link, the key messages under the cdc.gov coronavirus. It was updated on January 28th, 2022. Masking is a critical public health tool for preventing spread of COVID-19, and it's important to remember that any mask is better than no mask. So, but I digress. I guess getting back to the larger point about Democrats and Republicans is so I take it that I interpret Democrats' behavior during COVID, during the last year of President Trump's term, as proof that they are willing to pursue science more faithfully than Republicans, number one, even to political detriment. And what I mean by that is um, the lockdowns that occurred more enthusiastically or more quickly in blue states and in blue districts weren't very popular, right? People weren't happy with Democrats, Democratic governors, Democratic mayors for pushing, restrictions and lockdowns and curfews. So that certainly wasn't to their political benefit, number one. And number two, they encouraged and supported en masse COVID stimulus bills, which was signed, at least two were signed into law under President Trump, which is a political victory for Trump. So Democrats are, to me, that's indicative of even at a time when they could have been hitting President Trump harder than even what they did. They played ball and were willing to make unpopular decisions based on the science at the time. They were under the impression that lockdowns would be effective at curbing the virus, so they supported lockdowns to a far greater degree than red states, red governors, red mayors. And they backed President Trump on two major stimulus packages and COVID relief bills, which gave him political victories. I don't think if the shoe was on the other foot that Republicans would do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very skeptical of the claim that like Democrats were these kind of like science pursuing altruists. I think that within the Democrat base, there is enormous demand for, heavy COVID measures. And so when Democrats were, in these blue states where people were wanting COVID measures, it makes sense that they would pursue COVID measures as a way of like, you know, playing to their base. So I don't know. That doesn't like surprise me. That doesn't strike me as like, well, because lots of other people were like unhappy with lockdowns in other states, primarily red states, that Democrats now get like political points for, still pursuing lockdowns in their own home states.
Well, to clarify, I'm not saying that Republicans or excuse me, Democrats are these science-chasing altruists. I'm just saying they're more that than Republicans. You're going to find throughout the course of this conversation that I'm not going to make absolute claims about Democrats other than that on pretty much every metric they're better than Republicans. It's not that they're perfect. It's not that they're beyond reproach. It's not that they're not corrupt at times. It's just basically, remember that old commercial, anything you can do, I can do better. That's how I feel about Democrats versus Republicans. They're just better on pretty much every metric. Not that they're, I don't think that their like record on science is beyond reproach or that they do things of a completely altruistic nature. I just think the proof's in the pudding. They back Trump.
I mean, I remember in 2020, during the summer when riots were breaking out across the country, you had Democrats saying things that like, well, protesting is also, or like police violence is also a public health crisis. And that like, even if we have people like massing together in order to protest this, it's justified, even if it does end up spreading COVID because police violence is also damaging. So I think that like, I don't know, I think that Democrats are very inconsistent on these sorts of things, and they will blow whatever the political wind, pushes them towards.
Well, I guess what I would say is I can offer examples of Democrats basically how do I phrase this? I can offer examples of Democrats during COVID, since COVID is like the broad policy topic that we're talking about, of doing either unpopular things, number one, or number two, doing things that gave President Trump political victories. And I don't think you can do the reverse for me with Biden and Democrats and Republicans, excuse me. I don't.
What about the infrastructure bill?
What about it?
I mean, that was bipartisan. They worked across the aisle.
Well, let me ask you, do you think it was as bipartisan as the bipartisan COVID stimulus bills under President Trump?
I don't know the exact numbers. You just asked for like an example on the other side. So that would be one of them.
But even then, two things, like the amount of support that I think was like 13 members in the Senate, and those Republicans that did support the bipartisan infrastructure bill were harangued by their fellow Republicans and Tucker Carlson, members of the conservative media, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, because it gave President Biden a political victory. I don't recall that going on during President Trump's last year in office during COVID. I don't recall Democrats going, "Oh, what the hell are you doing? You're giving him a victory."
They absolutely did. Like, did you see like the Kyle Klinskys of the world who say things that like, "Oh, you're allowing him to get away with this. You need to like steelman him into doing something else, to giving more. Because if you don't, they're going to walk away and say like, well, we got everything we wanted from the Democrats and they just played ball." But you heard that rhetoric all the time.
I'll take Kyle Kulinski, fair enough. Do you have any Democratic politicians doing that?
I don't know. Like not off the top of my head, but like obviously this rhetoric gets pushed on both sides.
But see, that's my frustration. Is I understand that technically, yes, and I have no problem. But the problem with the both sides thing is that if that's the end of the analysis, it's really not worth anything. Like a shoplifter and a murderer are both criminals. You can say crimes are committed by both sides. But if that's the end of the analysis, then there are distinctions there worth making.
Your argument was that like Republicans are not willing to like do things that help, Biden get like political victories. If I said that they're not willing, I'll amend that. I think they're less willing. I think they are absolutely less willing to play ball with Biden than Democrats were with Trump. I think there's actually like there's information on this. Doesn't Nancy Pelosi have like an iron grip on Democrats?
Pardon?
Nancy Pelosi has like an incredible ability to, get votes in the Senate for Democratic bills. I think there's I don't even know what I would Google, but I think that I just don't know if I buy this story that you're whipping up here, because I know that like a lot of a lot of Republicans end up voting for more moderate policies and like are not able to be totally corralled by Republican lawmakers. It seems to me, I don't know, I just think that like I'm not totally buying this narrative.
But and just so I understand what your narrative is it's just both sides, and that's
That do
period.
what?
That don't engage in or that it's both sides that don't engage in bipartisanship or do engage in bipartisan whatever is going on. It's both sides that play politics for like that they'll
I mean I think both Republicans and Democrats like play politics, and like obviously that's their job. Like I wouldn't expect
Sure.
them to do anything else. When you say that like Democrats, you know, advocate for public health policy out of just like this like virtuous, you know, dedication to the truth, I'm a little bit skeptical of that, because you see so many examples of that not being the case.
Well, that's not what I said. I'm saying that not that Democrats are altruists. I'm saying that Democrats are more altruistic than Republicans. You cited me and like we kind of went all over the place with like cooperation and bipartisanship and whatnot, but like I don't recall Biden in 2020 when he was the leader of the Democratic Party, but still a candidate, excuse me. I don't recall him or other Democratic leaders haranguing Democrats for voting for President Trump's COVID stimulus relief bills. It was an enthusiastic support. Well done, Mr. President. Good, solid step in the right direction. Whereas with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that happened under Biden, it got a considerably smaller number, from what I remember, of Republican votes than Democrats gave to Trump's two stimulus bills, and Republican leaders harangued other Republicans who voted for that bill because it gave Biden a victory. So,
and the reason you bring this up is to like make the point that Democrats are ultimately committed to like what they believe is true, and like Republicans are playing like a politics game.
Yes, I think that Democrats are more committed. I think, in fact, one of my big issues with Democrats is that they don't play politics nearly as well as Republicans do, or as ruthlessly. And I would like to see that, especially with the stakes being so high. I want Democrats to play more like Republicans and be willing to deny the opposition political victories even during high stakes, because I think that the Republicans are such a threat to the health of the country and actually to their own base as well, that Democrats should play more ruthlessly to try to stop them. That's actually a fault I see in them. I wish they were more like Republicans.
Okay, that's so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that like to the extent that Democrats are like committed to their vision of truth and like not distorting the facts, like what they believe is true is just like completely incompetent and like disconnected with reality in so many cases. And like the two big like culture war, like big political issues that I can think of would be like policing, and then also transgender, you know, hormones and whatnot, where I think Democrats are just like way off the mark in understanding what the actual data is. Like you dig in.
Do you mean the Democratic Party, or do you mean people on Twitter? Just to clarify.
Well, like, I would mean like the average Democrat voter. Like there are polls on like how many unarmed black men do you think were shot by police in 2019, and you ask people across the political spectrum, and everyone, even conservatives, overestimate like how many people it was. And like liberals and progressives will say like hundreds or thousands, or like on the very progressive side, tens of thousands. And you know, maybe they're just like marking the box because that's obviously like a ridiculous answer. But
if I take notes, by the way, like I'm trying to do this from memory, but
go ahead.
I like how organic the conversation is, but like I struggle to remember certain things I want to address. So
I often have to take notes as well. So yeah, I might do that as well. But like the actual number is, you know, 19. And so I think that there's this tendency to like spin deaths as like a political narrative. and to hardcore push them when they're just like not true, or when they're like so misrepresented. And I think that's really dangerous to like the overall well-being of the country. And I'd prefer if, Democrats or Republicans didn't do that. But I think that like if they are in fact acting in a way that like they are acting honestly to what they believe is true, what they believe is true is just wrong in that case. The other example is like transgender healthcare, where people will say things like, well, if trans people don't have access to HRT, you'll see like suicides, you'll see like a total die-off, you'll see like genocide because of that. And like we don't actually have data to suggest that like HRT is an effective reducer in suicide. We don't have that. Like we have a few studies on trans morbidity, and they don't indicate a relationship at all. And we have like a few surveys where trans people say that like, yes, it would reduce my suicide, and they have like low sample sizes and like confounding variables and just like this host of problems. So like the evidence of that is actually very weak, and yet it gets stated as if it were fact by the Democrats. And so I think that like on issue after issue, the left just like builds their platform on this incredibly shaky ground.
Do you think the right does?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, do you think the Republican Party's like a joke in so many ways? And like, I mean, there's also polling data to suggest that like a significant number of Republicans believe that Democrats are like Satanist pedophiles. And so, I mean, the Republican Party is a complete joke.
Well, see, and that's what I mean. So I really want to make sure that we're not talking in circles here or around each other, because I want to be very clear. My goal is not to defend the online left or even the like fringes of the Democratic Party or even the mainstream of the Democratic Party on every issue. So I'll take you at face value that there is polling that indicates that the average Democratic voter, misreports statistics about, police misconduct against minorities, and that they wildly overblow the statistics. And I'll even take you at face value that that the average Democratic voter misunderstands, the relationship between HRT access and trans suicidality.
You're being very good faith, by the way. I appreciate
that. I appreciate that, and
I'll return the favor for sure.
And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because of all of the I don't watch every hippy dippy podcast or whatnot, but I watch many of them, and I think that you are the best faith and easiest to discuss with conservative or right leaning centrist. And like
it's a low bar.
It is, but you like exceed it. Like you don't just like barely clear it. You leap over it like a gazelle. And like it. And what was interesting was like the most recent one. Were you on the one last week, or was it the week before?
I was on the one with Rob Noor. I don't know.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah.
So Dylan hadn't uploaded it yet, but you did. So I watched your stream of it, and your frustration with your fellow conservatives.
It was rough.
It is, and well, that's what kind of clued me in. I'm thinking, okay, this is we can have a good faith conversation here, because I'm happy to concede just right out the gate that there's so many things that Democrats and online leftists get wrong, and there's no ego here. Yeah, if you gave me a list, ruminate. Democrats were wrong about this. What do you say? And I'll be like, yeah, absolutely. But with like the examples you gave, so for me again, it's because we exist in a duopoly. It's a choice at the end of the day. So it's like, the way I look at it is we have a choice every time we go to the ballot box between two parties that will deviate from science, that will emphasize some things for political advantage or philosophical bias and not others. And both parties lie, and both parties make, but it's a question of which one is worse, because I don't believe, maybe you do, but I don't think you do, that they are equally bad. Do you think that Republicans and Democrats, when it comes to lying and corruption and misstating facts, in your not conservative or liberal, but in terms of just the parties, do you think Republicans and Democrats are equally bad?
I think that both of them exist within the same incentive structure. And the incentive structure does not exist to encourage either to engage with facts unless they're politically expedient. So, like, if data came out and it said that, like, Republicans and Democrats, like, lied equally as often, I would find that plausible. I would also find it plausible if it showed one party lied more or, slightly more or less than the other one. So yeah, I don't think that, like, one is obviously better than the other.
Do you consider Trump an outlier then? Because surely you agree that he lies more than Biden does.
Yeah, Trump lies all the time.
Right. So it seems like, again, the examples you cited with policing and trans issues, but then you also cite, like, QAnon, the prevalence of QAnon in the Republican mainstream, or even the big lie. I mean, these are giant, these aren't like niche issues and fudging statistics. These are major dishonest narratives that are not just regurgitated among fringes in the Republican Party, but the mainstream. Like, I don't hear President Biden, the leader of the Democratic Party, going out, and maybe he does, lying about trans issues or lying about policing or haranguing policing. I do hear that from Republican leaders about the big lie and QAnon and shit like that, like broader, bigger issues. So how do you square that?
I mean, I think sometimes with, like, Republican rhetoric, it's like, it doesn't even attempt to lie. Like, when you see the Republican response to trans issues in a lot of states, they'll say things that, like, well, we want to limit HRT to, like, 18 years or older or 21 years or older. It's not like they're justifying that with, like, a fact. Like, well, we believe that it's because, most trans people, like, I don't know, are, like, 18 years older, like, detransition by the time they're, like, 21 or something like that. Like, I don't even think they're, like, attempting to make statements like that. They're just saying that, like, well, I think that trans people are, like, kind of icky, and therefore I think that we should reduce access to their healthcare. So I mean, I think it's, like, a hard thing to quantify. It's like another metric might be, like, what is just, like, the end result of these various policies that are getting implemented, and which is, like, making the country stronger and better in the future.
Well, and I think that's interesting because let's just take it at face value. The Democrats have either gotten it wrong or lied about policing and minority deaths and HRT and relationship with trans suicidality. So I concede those for the sake of argument and put them over here. But then when we have examples of Republicans getting things wrong or Republicans lying, you've got, like, COVID denialism, vaccine skepticism, the big lie. It seems like Republican lies are bigger, clumsier, and have more consequences, broadly speaking, than Democrat lies. Do you disagree?
Maybe. I mean, like, again, like, I voted for Biden because I was, like, so disappointed with Trump's response to COVID. So, like, I'm not really in the business of, like, defending Republican responses to COVID.
Right.
I mean, I also think that, like, the Republican response to, like, the election, I think, is very much like a reverberation of Trump's popularity and Trump's personality and his inability to take, a loss on the chin. I do think, on the other hand, like, there is truth to the fact that, like, the political system allows for, like, an enormous amount of power to be exerted through, like, civil service people and bureaucrats and media figures and pundits and the education system. And so, like, in a sense, I think that Republicans can win election after election. Like, they can take the White House for 48 years. But I think what's going to happen is that, like, Trump is going to be constrained by institutions. Right-wingers are going to be constrained by institutions. And they're not really going to make a lot of progress. And then meanwhile, the culture is going to move left on all of these issues. And so I think that, like, in a sense, the election process is one that enables, like, the continual leftward cultural shift of things and doesn't really, I think that Republicans can be very, like, obstructionist, but they're not really advancing or going to be able to advance a positive affirmative vision for the United States.
But I would argue that that's not so much, and maybe this is not what you were implying, but it seems to me that the implication was Republicans are not able to advance a positive affirmative message for the country because the landscape is biased in favor of the left. And I would argue it's actually, I think it goes to the root of the Republican Party's philosophy. I mean, by its very nature, right, if you look at it from a 30,000-foot view, progressivism, right or wrong, is that they try to move, right? By definition, they try to change things. Conservatism, by its very nature, is either minimal or no change. So Republicans are less interested in change than Democrats are, and certainly not to the same extent and in so many avenues of political, civic, and social life. Their failure to promote a positive affirmative message, that's their failure. I don't think that that's the responsibility of left-wing influence in education or in the media. That's their own philosophical failure and lack of imagination.
Yeah,
They are the
kind of.
obstructionist party.
I mean, I think that they like benefit from this status quo, or like the way that the status quo and the political institutions are set up. There is like a niche. There's like a way to power that exists via the Republican strategy of like being sort of obstructionist and conservative and not advancing a positive vision. And I think that like, in a sense, this is a very intellectually easy position to hold.
Very.
Because it doesn't require a lot of effort or a lot of project building. And so I think that the Republican Party like survives, in a sense, on being able to advance this, or like, not really advance anything, but take power and act as like a kind of temporary speed bump for Democrats. And I think that like, if you were to have a right-wing intellectual movement that was like, much more serious, or a right-wing political movement that was much more serious about advancing a specific vision, I think that would receive a lot more crackdown and backlash from institutions that exist in the United States. It would be a bigger threat to like the political landscape. And so I think that like, in a sense, the Republican Party sort of survives by making itself the party of crazies and the party that's not going to do much because, they don't need to be like stamped out by the political powers that be. They can be allowed to exist as the speed bump and not really do anything.
That's an interesting paradigm there. I'm not sure I agree because I think that Republicans have been highly effective at not only winning elections and securing power and being obstructionists, but I think that they're more than a speed bump. I mean, I agree that over time it seems to be sorry, do you hear the sirens in the background? Is that being picked up on the mic?
A little bit, but it's quiet. It's fine.
Okay, sorry about that. They've been very, very effective despite their lack of popularity, despite their lack of affirmative vision at winning elections, maintaining power, and I would argue holding their own in so many respects. I mean, Fox News is the single biggest news network and most successful on television. Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and all these people, they blow the David Pakmans and Brian Tyler Cohens out of the water. I mean, they're definitely holding their own, and you could say, it's the last stand in an inevitable cultural shift. But I think they're just more than a speed bump, and if they are a speed bump, they are a mountainous speed bump. They are the Everest of speed bumps. But there again, it just seems to me, you distinguish a right-wing intellectual movement from the Republican Party. Now, I'm not a right-winger, but I can recognize that. That's why, I guess, going back earlier to what I said, the Republican Party is a danger not only to everybody on the left. I would argue they're a danger to their own base because they're not a right-wing intellectual movement. They are a group of vicious bad faith actors who are embracing extremism, either to seize power for as long as possible, or just like the last desperate grasps at it. I mean, that's where I think, and that's part of the reason, again, I wanted to have this conversation with you in particular, because I know you're a right winger, or at least a right wing centrist or whatnot. But you also don't go out of your way to defend the Republican Party, and you voted for President Biden in 2020. So you clearly recognize the distinction between conservatism or a right wing intellectual movement and the party that is supposed to represent those things. And that's why I think it's so important for all of us to recognize on the right and the left and in the middle that it's not a right versus left thing, or maybe it is, but what we need to do first is get the Republican Party out of the way, because I mean, there's that are you familiar with George Will? He's this ancient conservative journalist and writer, whatnot. He's a conservative thought leader. How many of these people hate Trump, right? I mean, and I know you're aware of this, all these kind of the pre-Trump conservative intellectuals, they couldn't stand him. And even many of his sycophants now hated him when he was running for office. So why can't we, as a leftist and a right-wing centrist, agree that we almost have to, we need to get rid of Trumpism in the Republican Party. We need to punish it. We need to excise it. And then we can go back to slugging at each other the way I think we want to, and the way that maybe we used to. Why can't we recognize that that's the immediate problem? Not Biden, not Democrats, but the MAGA faction of the Republican Party.
I mean, I agree completely. I think that's a good stance to have, because I would say that if right-wingers want to actually have serious change, I don't think that they can hop on the next populist bandwagon that allows them to shitpost and make memes. I think they actually need to be serious about things. And so I would also say that it's very important that the right wing is able to critique itself and to clamp down on conspiracy theories like the QAnon stuff, because I don't think that you can really build a long-lasting political movement if you have these pillars that are basically, anti-reality. And to an extent, I think that any political group has its own mythos, right? And,
right.
There's a lot of I've just been on this Jonathan Haidt tear. So I've read a lot of his, his work on moral psychology and belief systems. And
he's a good, strong leftist, by the way. I'm glad you're reading him. Is he rubbing off on you at all? Are you?
I really like him.
Leaning left more?
I don't know if he's made me lean left, but I think that one of the things he points out is that irrational beliefs can make a group identity stronger. And so I think that you can acknowledge that and say that, okay, maybe any belief system, any group is going to have a few beliefs that are irrational, that are developed. But you got to make sure that those irrational beliefs point towards something higher, point to something positive. And so I think that QAnon is not a good example of this, versus where Christianity is probably a good example of this. Where Christianity believes things that I think are probably false, like the existence of a divine creator God that interacts with the world. But a divine creator God that interacts with the world is aspirational. It encourages you to pursue virtue. And so I think that if you develop the right kinds of mythology, that would be beneficial. And so I think that the Republican Party and right-wing intelligentsia really needs to work on developing a positive mythology if it's going to go forwards.
I agree, and I mean, not that not that I'm rooting for you guys, but I mean, no, I agree. But
I think it'd be better for leftists too, right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's funny. I remember Jen Psaki got so much shit for, revealing behind the pulpit that she is a West Wing fan. But I love The West Wing. It's one of my favorite shows. And I wish it was the world we lived in, where you had two relatively good faith parties who each had relatively affirmative views of the world and what the world should be. And they would do the long debates and the walk and talks and things like that. And that's, for the most part, how they settled disputes. But if we ever lived in that world, we certainly don't now. And so I mean, I would love that, though. That'd be ideal if Aaron Sorkin wrote everything. But he doesn't. And, I guess where I'm kind of confused then is at the beginning of this conversation, you indicated to me that, if Republicans and Democrats, the parties, not the left, not the right, not the broader movements, but the specific political organizations, if one was any better or worse than the other, like that was something you had a hard time sussing out. But then it seemed like you also agreed that it's in everybody's best interest to recognize that the immediate threat politically is the MAGA faction of the Republican Party. Maybe it's because you still separate the Republican Party from MAGA, whereas I don't. I think it's a cancer that's metastasized in the Republican Party. But can you kind of clarify that? How can you recognize that, conservatives and liberals and progressives and libertarians, everybody needs to basically stop swinging at each other, neutralize MAGA, and then recognizing that there's a clear, distinct threat and common enemy, while also saying that Republicans and Democrats are basically the same in terms of lying and, being political and all these things?
I mean, I think that the distinction just is that, I think it would be good to excise these very cancerous aspects of the Republican Party from the Republican Party if it's going to be a serious right-wing movement. But I don't think that the way to do that is to become a Democrat. So
When you mean by becoming a Democrat, I just mean vote for Democrats.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that the solution is to vote for Democrats.
Okay. Well, then how would you, if you could, here's how I see it. I don't think you can excise MAGA until MAGA loses. You have to repudiate and punish. Though. But kind of not. I mean, yes, so President Trump lost in 2020, but he's still the de facto leader of the Republican Party. Some polls suggest that Ron DeSantis is pulling ahead in certain ways, but that's not the consensus yet. And that's also with basically the full weight of the Democratic Party with the January 6 hearings and whatnot, trying to crush him. And he's still kind of the leader of one of two major political parties. And it's not just Trump. Trump has influenced Ted Cruz, Jim Jordan, Paul Gosar, all these people down, Matt Gaetz. So it's not just one guy, and the one guy's still pretty powerful. So to me, and he might very well run again in 2024, and 538 straw polls have him favored. If he were to run now, if 2024 were right now, most of the polls say he'd beat Biden in 2024. So to me, I don't think the job's done. I don't think the vampire's been staked. He's not beaten in a meaningful way. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, and so I don't think that voting Democrats can remove the MAGA element of the Republican Party. I would say that it's a responsibility not to encourage the Republican Party by voting for them while they're not delivering on anything meaningful. And so I think that if you continually vote for the Republican Party, you sort of encourage this complacency. I think you have to withhold your vote until it's earned. And I think that when Republicans do get into office, you need to be in the meantime, extremely cautious with your expectations. You cannot expect the swamp to be drained because that's not how politics works. And so I think that if Republicans do get into the office, you should, as if you're a right winger, just view it as a kind of speed bump for the Democrats And that's not necessarily something that should be like celebrated or patted on the back, because it is, like I said, not where you'd want it to be, not where I'd want it to be.
So if you're gonna, so you're saying again, because I don't want to misspeak here. So you're saying that the key would be, if you're a conservative or a Republican voter, would be not to vote Democrat, but withhold your votes from Republicans.
That's what I would do, yeah.
So you wouldn't vote at all, or you'd vote third party.
I would probably not vote at all, or maybe vote
You,
third party. I mean, like,
you
write in the name, that kind of thing.
gotcha. I see. Okay. Um, I mean, I'd love to have your vote for the Democratic Party, but that's better than voting Republican. So I guess I'll take it.
What is an issue that you could like convince me on that I'm like, okay, I should put things aside and this issue is like worth it?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. So, I mean, I'm gonna rattle a couple off, and then you tell me if any of these interest you, or if there's any fodder for conversation. So, number one, I would say that, um, and I guess it depends. We'll go back to COVID. I would say that Democratic endorsement of cloth masks notwithstanding, Democratic policies and rhetoric about COVID were far more responsible and effective than Republican. So that's one thing. President Trump did not, when he was in office, attempt to use any of his power as chief executive or leader of the Republican Party to take the virus seriously. And as a consequence, 1 million people have died. If those people still died despite Trump doing his best, I wouldn't be as inclined to blame him. But he didn't do his best, and he was chief executive, so I do blame him. So that's one thing. Number two, I would say the economy. We are dealing with record inflation, but so are other nations, developed nations, great powers around the planet. So it's not like it's just a Democrat thing. And had Trump and Republicans managed COVID better in the first place, then we probably wouldn't be seeing the inflation that we see now. Despite that, under President Biden, we have record low unemployment. The American jobs, or the American Rescue Plan, the ARP, according to Moody's Analytics, contributed and accelerated job growth and GDP growth. And that's another thing, too. Republicans tout themselves as the party of fiscal responsibility and the economic party. But actually, if you look at the past 35 years, it's not true. More jobs have been created by far under Democratic administrations than Republican. Democrats have presided over much higher real GDP growth than Republican. More.
Wait, what is the time frame that this is in?
Oh, just over the span of like 30 years.
Like including like the 2008 recession, I'm guessing is like a huge part of this metric, right?
All recessions, yeah, which by the way have been triggered by Republican administrations, not Democrats. So the 2008 recession, for example, the impetus for it happened under President Bush, and it was actually President Obama that had to dig us out, which is actually another reason to vote Democrat. It seems like more recessions happen because of Republican presidents or on their watch than vice versa.
I mean, I think that economies need to go through recessions to an extent. I think that there's this impulse from a lot of economists and politicians that when you're in office, you don't want the economy to be in recession because it looks bad. And so the response is like print money and, put it in the economy, stimulate things, make things good. And it's like, it's this very much a band-aid solution. And it's like, it's an addictive solution because you can run an economy on stimulus for only so long before eventually it comes due, and you have to face the effects. So to an extent, I think that getting out of recessions quickly is not necessarily the goal of, economics. I think I'm very skeptical of that because I think it's normal for economies to, contract and expand.
Sure.
And if you try to control that so much, you create inefficiencies.
Well, I mean, we didn't get out of it slowly under President Obama. It was actually a very slow economic recovery, but we did recover. It took years. But by the time President Obama left office, he basically left President Trump with a sterling economy that he then drove into the ground in less than. Basically, modern history is Democrats cleaning up
Can
Republicans'
you really
economic mess.
say that Trump like drove the economy into the ground? Do you think that's
Can
like, oh,
I can because COVID mismanagement. Like at the end of the
okay,
day,
but the COVID like if we did more lockdowns, which like by the way, I would be in favor of. I think is something that would cause like more economic contraction, at least in the short term. And like
in the short,
I would not blame Democrats or Republicans or whoever implement lockdowns for that because I think you recognize that that's a trade-off. You slow the economy in order to save lives while you're waiting to build the vaccine. So I think that's like
right.
a reasonable trade-off. But like Trump didn't do that. He didn't make the trade-off of restricting the economy to save lives, which I think is not to his credit.
Well, but you said it. You said it right there in the short term, right? So if President Trump had organized or attempted to organize a more serious response to COVID from the beginning, a more honest, transparent, concerted effort, if he'd, again, not only used his executive power but the power of the bully pulpit, um, I the we have reason. I mean, his own medical advisor, Dr. Deborah Birx, believed that just in terms of lives lost, he could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. But even the economic consequences, as far as I know, those countries that took the lot, like Vietnam and others that took lockdowns seriously early on, have recovered or are on the process of recovering from the economic fallout without having to go as hard in terms of stimulus. So, and I'm not an economist. I could be way wrong on this, entirely wrong. But it seems to me taking an aggressive, rapid response in the short term means that recovery would have happened sooner and perhaps quicker because we wouldn't have these half-assed staggered lockdowns sprinkled across the country. All of which is to say, again, I want to be very clear, if President Trump had taken things more seriously and bad shit still happened, which I think it would have to an extent because he wasn't a dictator, I wouldn't blame him.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say he drove the economy into the ground if he did everything in his power to preserve the economy. But I don't think he did because I think that, and I think most economists would agree that the best way to handle the economy would also to have been to take COVID seriously from the beginning and respond responsibly and accordingly. And he didn't. And that's why I'm comfortable blaming him. To say nothing of, that's just COVID and Trump's relationship with COVID in the economy. There's also the fact that he added $2 trillion worth of tax cuts to the national debt, even though he swore he would clear it out in 4 years.
Yeah,
And
this
actually,
is true.
by the end, he started a trade war with China that American consumers ended up paying for. The steel tariffs that I think one industry, one domestic industry, and I want to say it's farmers, but I could be wrong. They suffered as a consequence of that because of the trade war with China. And then by the time he left office, he added more debt in a 4-year term than any president since I think like FDR's, like 5.8 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, compared to Obama, compared to Clinton, Trump was a joke economically, and so was Bush before him. So it seems to be, at least in modern history, Democratic administrations do have a better record of economic stewardship than Republicans. And to be clear, I understand it's due to a myriad of factors, that it's not like any president is the total steward of the economy. I'm just saying that a healthy economy is correlated with the Democrats' ass in the Oval Office.
And it sounds
So
like you're saying that like contractions in the economy during the Trump presidency and during the COVID era were that was Trump's responsibility. He's responsible for that. But you're also saying that like contractions that we've seen in the economy recently, he's also responsible for. Is that correct?
I mean, he bears some responsibility because it's still dealing with the implications of policies and failures from his administration. It doesn't shut off there. But I mean, there are economists who have also said that
Okay.
President Biden's third economic stimulus package has contributed to inflation as well. So Biden and the Democratic Party deserve some of the blame as well.
Yeah, so like if Trump did contract the economy more if he chose to take that route, reducing economic growth in the short term to benefit like long-term health of the country, and therefore to make like a faster recovery later. If he took that route and we saw like a booming economy now, do you think you'd be like sitting across from me saying that like, well, Trump did contract the economy, but that was great because now it's growing? Or do you think that you would say that like under Trump's term, we had massive contractions in the economy, and now under Biden's term, look how good it's going? Like, do you think that you'd be saying that? Which way would you fall?
I mean, if we could draw the line there, so like in your counterfactual, the economic consensus would be, hey, look, the current economic boom that President Biden's enjoying is a direct result, either singularly or even primarily, due to President Trump's responsible decision to contract the economy during COVID to take it seriously, then absolutely, I'd be willing to give him credit for that.
Okay, I'll take your word for that because good faith.
Now that's me personally. In this political climate, I'd be okay with Democrats politicizing that message and saying,
just taking credit for it.
Absolutely. Until
like Trump taking credit for Obama's progress, right?
About this. My policy is very transparent. I'm willing to act in good faith in dialogue like this, but I think that national politics is not in good faith. And I think that when we're up against an opponent that lies as much as the Republican Party, I wish Democrats would do it more. I wish they played just as ruthlessly as Republicans until Republicans stop.
So. Yeah, I think that like the spending is kind of another version of this same effect, where like both Republicans and Democrats spend more and more during their presidencies, and show more and more willingness to basically win like political favors by engaging in spending or tax cuts, which is like if you cut taxes equally for everyone, basically you're allowing people to have more money in their pockets at the end of the day, and the government less. And I think that these things can be like very economically destructive, but they win short-term gains. And so there's a kind of an arms race where one president will, give lots of money to people, spend lots of money on infrastructure and all of these political projects. And then the next one, just tries to do that more. But that kind of spending is like not sustainable. And so I think that like the rhetoric arms race is like very similar, where one person engages in lying and deceit, and then the other person does to fight it. And you have this escalation where each side is going to be necessarily more able to see the other side's lies than their own lies. And so they're always going to feel justified in escalating the rhetoric. And I think that that ultimately is this like political entropy that leads to, complete disaster and destruction of institutions.
The problem is that I don't think that, certainly Democrats have lied. Like I'm thinking one big one is in 2012 when Mitt Romney was running for president. Harry Reid, then Senate Majority Leader, maybe he was Minority Leader, but he was the Senate Democrat leader at the time, spread some sort of lie about something about Romney, either his like personal net worth or how he got his money or something like that. And when asked about it a year later, he's like, well, it worked, didn't it? And I miss Harry Reid because Harry Reid was a good foil for McConnell, who was also willing to lie and bend rules and norms and whatnot. The thing is, though, while I agree with you that it's either it's escalatory or it's an arms race or it's a game of chicken, whatever metaphor you want, by definition you have to play, right? Like every time the United States, during the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, even people who didn't want to participate recognized that we had to because the alternative was to let Russia win it. We didn't trust Russia to be responsible, or the Soviet Union, for winning the arms race. And it's the same thing here.
No, it's not the same thing, because you're talking about like an interstate versus like intrastate relationship. And the problem is that like when it's an external state that you're in an arms race with, that's beneficial. It's like the best way you can deal with that is by like bolstering your own state like infinitely. But the problem with like an intrastate conflict is that if you destroy like your ability to communicate well, you actually destroys your own state's ability to be effective on the world stage. And so like I'm very interested in like a strong, prosperous United States. And if we engage in like political games, rhetoric, and lying, I think that it's going to, it's going to hurt everyone ultimately. And like, it's very much this kind of like prisoner's dilemma, where if you can manage to not lie and get the other party to cooperate, then you can benefit everybody. And so we have to develop mechanisms systematically to encourage that.
But that hasn't happened. See, that's kind of my point. Is it's not that Democrats are perfectly good faith, but again, I think the political record shows they just are observably better faith than the Republican Party. And so I'm going to ask you, what has that gotten them?
I don't know if I believe the Democrats are better faith, but like, I'm not sure if like.
So let's talk about that. Okay, so like easy example. When have Democrats ever done anything like withholding a Supreme Court seat like Merrick Garland and then giving it to the first nominee from the Republican president and then promising that if the shoe was on the other foot, they would never do it, and then doing it with Amy Coney Barrett? You don't have anything like that for the Democratic Party.
Obviously, like threatening the nuclear option, right?
No, that's not the same at all. How is that? Are you talking about when Harry Reid used the nuclear option?
Because it's threatening the institutional stability of the Supreme Court.
The institution was being abused by the Republic. There were 168 filibusters at that point in American history. Half of them were done under the Obama administration by Republicans. Republicans were blocking appointees from Obama at an unprecedented rate. And Reid didn't reach immediately for the nuclear option. It just kept happening again and again and again until finally he pulled the trigger. See, that's where, and I'm glad we're getting into this, because I'm thinking what you would want in that situation is Reid to just lay there and take it and just let McConnell run roughshod over him. That's the problem that I have with not only Republicans and conservatives, but often my fellow liberal. I'm like, these damn Democrats, I can't believe that they hit back at a person swinging at them. It's ridiculous. If McConnell hadn't abused the filibuster, Harry Reid wouldn't have invoked the nuclear option. But what did McConnell say? We're going to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And he used every trick at his disposal to make Obama as ineffective as possible. So I don't blame Reid for invoking the nuclear option. And you shouldn't either. You should blame McConnell for abusing the system in the first place. Or you should propose something that Reid should have done to stop McConnell, to punish McConnell, to deter McConnell without invoking the nuclear option.
I think my stance is that I just refuse to engage with this like political game until we can build a political project that doesn't allow for these things. And I think
your side is the one playing the game and changing the rules more than
Republicans are not my side, okay?
But
I'm not a Republican.
I mean. That's fair, and that you're right. That's fair. I shouldn't have said that. But my point is that that's the key statement. We both have to look and say Republicans are the primary problem here. I
don't know if I can say that, because I think that like both political parties, like everyone in the political system, has incentive to kind of play dirty in this way. So I don't think like it makes sense to point to like individual actions, because I think that like ultimately like you're liberal, you are always going to be able to like find more and better examples of Republican dishonesty than of Democrat dishonesty, because you are going to be looking for that, and because whatever, and vice versa, like the political bias just works one way. And so you can like name examples, and Republicans are going to name examples back, and you're going to get in these like fights about like, well, how bad is like invoking the nuclear option, how bad is like this response, etc. And you're always going to see the Republican response as worse, but like the end result of this kind of tit for tat thinking is a worse politics.
But that's where we have, but the ability to say words doesn't lend those words any like like validity. Yes, I can offer an example like the Supreme Court switcheroo shenanigans that Republicans engaged with. And you can say in response, well, what about Harry Reid threatening the nuclear option? So I offered an example and you offered an example, and then we had a conversation where, unless you've got something to refute it, I clearly demonstrated that what Republicans did was worse than what the Democrats did, and what the Democrats did had a very specific Republican-provoked context.
What I'm saying is that, like, your logic is a logic that leads to a worsening political scenario. So, like, even if you're correct, that logic is going to make politics worse for everybody.
So is the logic of letting Republicans run roughshod over the opposition party.
Well, I think that the solution is to, like, create incentive structures that don't allow for that. Not to just, like, go full force into, like, buying into the incentive structures which created the problem in the first place.
Put it another way, Taf or Taj or Taf, like, what is
whatever's easiest. I think a lot of people just call me Taff, but you could also call me
Taff.
April, whatever's easiest.
April? I like that. Do they ever call you, like, if it's so it's Taftaj, not Taftaj?
I think I say Taftaj.
Taftaj. Does anyone say, like, Laffy Taffy or Taj Mahal or anything like that?
I've heard various nicknames, yeah.
Okay. Since we're besties now, I think that's going to be one of my nicknames for you, is Taj Mahal.
Sounds good.
Or April, one of the two. Anyway, damn it, where was I going with that? Oh, okay. So put it another way. If I were Supreme Leader of the Democratic Party and you were Supreme Leader, reluctantly, of the Republican Party, and it would fill you with great shame, but let's say you were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, hey, I will stop playing this game, but you must punish ruthlessly the people in your party who have caused this brinksmanship. So, like, I'm not saying that my way.
I think that would be a good deal. Like,
the problem is Republicans don't do it. That's my problem. It's like I don't want a coarsening. I really don't want a coarsening of the civic relationships and the political dialogue, because I agree. Until one part, if it's constantly escalating, by definition, one party has to be neutralized for the escalation to stop. My problem is Republicans don't self-police.
I think that's
not to nearly the same extent Democrats do.
Yeah, I think that is, like, kind of true. Where, like, I think if you had just, like, one party that was able to, like, take absolute control and then, like, manage things without having to, like, worry about opposition, you could, like, theoretically institute an incentive structure that allows for, like, better politics and better results. And, like, you can't do that as long as you're playing this, like, internal political arms race of rhetoric.
Right, but I mean, even during the arms race, if people want the arms race to stop, so here's how I look at it. Here's how I look at the arms race. I look at it as Republicans started the arms race and have escalated the arms race. Democrats, in some ways, are trying to keep up. I wish they would keep up more. And you're saying, hey, this arms race has to stop. In which case, I'm saying, I don't mind saying, hey, Democrats, put the knife down. But then I want to be like, Taff, now you need to take your knife, metaphorically, and metaphorically deal with the people that caused this in the first place. Not wag your finger. Don't say, hey, don't do it again. But, like, ruthlessly punish to deter this from ever happening again. And Republicans don't do it. So when Democrats, that's the joke. Obama referred to it as a circular firing squad, and it's absolutely true. We eat each other all the time, even when it is absolutely politically stupid to do it. Republicans don't do that. Very rarely. I mean, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are two high-profile examples of the Republican Party eating itself, but it's them against the rest of the Republican Party. They've been formally censured. They're being primaried. Adam Kinzinger isn't even running again. Republicans, generally speaking, are infinitely more likely to close ranks and not hold one another accountable. So when I hear you say, let's stop the arms race, I'm thinking, okay, but if your solution to the arms race is Democrats, you stop playing, Republicans keep going, that's not going to work for me.
I mean, I would tell Republicans the same thing. Like, I would, if you're a Republican sitting here and you're telling me that, like,
Yeah.
we need to ratchet up the rhetoric, we need to distort reality more in order to win, because look at all of these, like, Democrat failures, look at what they're trying to implement. I would say, no, this is like a one way ticket to, like, total reality breakdown, inability to engage with politics in a rational way that's ultimately going to build a stronger United States. I think that's like the only place it goes. And so I would tell that person, I would say, if it's necessary to lose, like in order to de escalate things, then you need to lose, because winning is not worth the kind of Faustian bargain of destroying the reality to which politics sits on.
I, I, well said. I completely agree. So I'm gonna check your pulse again. So, like,
Okay.
where are we on recognizing that it's really the GOP first, or the MAGA element of the GOP that really needs to put the knife down first? Where are we with that? Do you
Well, I think
agree
that
with that?
potentially I have like more sway with right wingers than I do with
Sure.
left wingers. So like that would be my solution, to be like
Yes.
left or like right wingers. You need to put down. I mean, right wingers. You need to put down the knife, because like you can
Yeah.
do this.
Right.
And I think that like the right wing should not be seeking like these short-term political power plays. And I think that they should really focus on building like something more meaningful and then take power. And I think that like the left, in a sense, is really good at this, and that like you have these left-wing intellectuals who are writing in the 20th century about, first take we need to gain influence in like law and politics and education and the family structure and religion and so on. Like, this is like
Right.
Gramsci's outline for political power. And I think that's really good, because like you do need to build that base first before you take power. Because if you're taking power and your goal is just like to dole out rewards within the first 4 or 8 years you have power by like, tax cuts or, distributing benefits to people, ratcheting up spending. I think that is also the kind of thing that is like politically entropic and good in the short term and terrible in the long term. So I think that like that kind of policy is something that really only benefits politicians who like get paid from that. Those are the only people who are like winning long term from that. Everyone else loses out. And so I would say that like Republicans and right wingers should make themselves comfortable with short term losses and focus on a more long term political project, even if that means Democrats winning in the short term.
You had me at Democrats winning in the short term. No, I mean, no, I mean, I agree. If I were a more centrist person or a more right wing person, I think that I would endorse that playbook completely. Just, Nancy Pelosi says this thing, and she got a lot of shit for it, and I get it. We need a strong. She was making an appeal to Republicans, guys. Come on, get your shit together. Come back. Excise, lance the boil that is MAGA, because we need a strong Republican Party. And again, I appreciate the sentiment. I certainly understand the benefit theoretically of a loyal, good faith opposition, either which way. Like in the UK system where they have the shadow cabinet and whatnot, and kind of like a not necessarily like a full on obstructionist able to stop you, but kind of like a brake check sort of thing. I love that in theory, because I absolutely believe that any political movement, any political organization can have dangerous excesses. But I think that every system that's ever been conceived and that ever can be conceived is predicated on good faith. Like, that's it. Like the Constitution is not, a thing out of Supernatural or Harry Potter where the words are magically binding. We have to have buy-in. And that's another reason why I find the modern day Republican Party so dangerous, is because you and Destiny, I think, bond over or have a lot in common anyway over your love of institutions. Is that fair to say? Like you love the American institutions, the traditions, the political and civic institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think they could be better in a lot of ways, but I think institutions are preferable to like populism, for example.
Fair enough. So, as a conservative, how do you feel personally, and what do you think the threat is posed by President Trump shattering the 230-year tradition of the peaceful transfer of power? No Democrat ever did that, but a Republican did.
I mean, I think
And
it's chaos. Like, I don't believe in the ability to like have, I don't even know how to put this. Like, it's not a revolution, but like, obviously it's not going anywhere. Like, January 6th was not like,
going to succeed.
yeah, not
Yes,
going to succeed. But like,
I agree.
even if it did succeed, I think that would lead to like a much worse America. And I'm very much on the side of like preserving order as opposed to like jumping headfirst into chaos and then hoping that your side like somehow comes out on top.
So do you think it was dangerous what he did by breaking the peaceful transfer of power?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like overstate it too much. I think that
Wait, may I ask why? I just want to, just so I'm very clear, because you don't want to give liberals ammunition, or because you don't think it's as dangerous as a lot of liberals say?
because I think that Trump's response to January 6th was not like, I don't think that he was like angling for like an active coup. I think what Trump saw was like a lot of angry people that were like on his side, and he just like reflexively did not want to denounce them. And so I think that like when you say like Trump is like breaking institutions, really like the way he's doing that is like with rhetoric and refusing to denounce these people. Saying that they're like very special and encouraging people to like take up real arms against their government as a result. But like I don't think that Trump is like really seriously plotting anything. And so that's why like I try not to overstate it. I think what he did was like, oh, sorry, I thought you froze for a
That's okay.
second.
No,
I think that his rhetoric was like not good. It was destructive.
sure. Well, he helped create the circumstances that caused the mob of passionate people to believe the things that they did, right? I
Mhm.
mean, they didn't spontaneously birth the big lie themselves without his aid. He planted the seeds and nurtured it.
And I think that's a
So
good example of like rhetoric that's just like destabilizing and like disconnected from reality.
I agree, but and again, not to put too fine a point on it, and maybe if you would just concede it, I wouldn't have to keep making this point. But the that was a Republican that did that, and you will find no analog from a Democrat that is remotely comparable to the big lie and the refusal to commit to the peaceful transfer of power. Because it wasn't just on January 6th. He was asked during the election cycle, will you commit to a peaceful transfer of power? And he never said yes.
My
Biden did.
my problem is that you're like we're agreeing that this is very bad, but like your response is that like the Democrats need to be willing to also lie more.
Well,
So it's
well,
like it's like so contrary to what I want. Or
no. It's basically, I guess. Let me refine it further. My position is, if conservatives, genuine conservatives who are well intentioned, good faith, won't stop MAGA, then I want Democrats to take whatever steps they need to do it.
by like whatever
So
means necessary. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. My ideal situation is that the right wingers in my family, my right wing friends, would then turn to MAGA and go, "What the hell were we thinking? Not only are we not voting for you, we want you to go to jail. We are not only withholding support, we want you punished to make an abject lesson to everyone. We're not going to do that again for the pursuit of power." That's what I want. And if that's not going to happen, and so far there have been no indications that it is, then I want the opposition, the Democrats, to go, okay, well, if this is going to be a knife fight for democracy, and the other person on the opposition team isn't telling his buddy to chill, then we should pick up ours and start acting the same way. Start defending ourselves and important. We just don't need to stand here and get cut. So to me, this is a failure of Republicans policing themselves and excising MAGA. And if Republicans won't do it, I want Democrats to do it. So that's not Democrats behaving the same way is not the ideal outcome. I'm just saying if it's a choice between that and just laying there and letting Republicans run roughshod, I'd rather Democrats fight dirty, just like Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's ultimately what I'm getting at. It's like, you're looking at these, like, negative things the Republicans are doing, and you're saying, they're doing negative things. That's an advantage for them. So we also got to do negative things.
Yeah, I mean, so surely you. What will stop Republicans if not Democrats winning? See, my logic is in order to meaningfully win, in order to win in a way that successfully stops Republicans, Democrats are going to have to be more ruthless, more concerted. They're going to have to step up their game. That's my logic.
I think this is like kind of ultimately where this logic leads, because like you have an escalating tensions of like rhetoric and arms race, and like we can imagine like both sides become like more and more disconnected from reality. Maybe like within the internal party, like people know what's really going on in order to like run it, well enough so their party doesn't collapse, but they're willing to like bring people on with rhetoric and propaganda and lies because it gets them like the next victory. It puts them in the White House for the next 4 years. And the inevitable result of that is like continual societal breakdown until one party is able to just like totally wipe out the other one, to like seize power permanently and then like institute their control and like reset things. Well, maybe like reset things, wipe things to a clean slate, or just like run the country as like an authoritarian one party. And like that's the only way you get out of it if the solution is like continual ratcheting up, because it never de-escalates under that kind of logic.
But it also hasn't de-escalated with Democrats being slow to escalate. Republicans, it's not like Republicans are only ratcheting things up because Democrats are ratcheting things up. Republicans are ratcheting things up. Republicans are fighting dirty because they can't win a fair fight. Let's just put it bluntly. You on the Hippy Dippy podcast the other day, you guys were talking about popularity. Like I think it was the popularity of abortion rights, and the British guy or the Scottish guy, I can't remember what his accent was, the one who called you a eugenicist.
Counterpoints, Connor.
No, was he the one who called you a eugenicist?
He did.
Counterpoints isn't British. There was
he's not. Oh, the guy right below him. But Counterpoints was the person who brought that up. I think he was like, we're friendly, and he was kind of messing with me.
Yeah, but what's the British guy's name?
I forget.
That's not good. I thought it was Loner Box or something. Like I can't.
No, not Loner Box.
It's irrelevant. But anyway, he made the point. There was a bit of a back and forth there about popularity, and you made the case that by the way. Kevin Logan, thank you. Where you had a bit of a back and forth there about popularity, and he inelegantly made the point that on a national level, Democrats are consistently more popular than Republicans, and it's true. They've only won a popular vote one time in the past 30 years for president. Democrats represent 40 million more people in their Democratic senators do than Republicans. Poll after poll after poll shows that Biden's agenda is very popular. So the popularity contest tends to swing Democrat, and Republicans have to appeal to institutions that favor them, like the Electoral College or indeed even the Senate, which has a rural bias. So I would argue that the Republicans are ratcheting up because they've been losing. Trump was very much a response to Obama, right? But Obama didn't, he didn't campaign on, he didn't win his reelection or campaign for reelection on election fraud and, stolen elections and big lies and all that stuff. Obama won a fair fight, despite certain institutional disadvantages like the Electoral College. He still won. I think Republicans think, and actually you can find quotes to that effect. I'd have to dig them up, but during the election or whatnot, Trump's attorneys made the comment that if we do X, we'll never win. They can't win a fair fight, or they're not favored to win the fair fight. So what do? They play dirty. That's not Democrats' fault. It's like it's one of those things. Then just lose. Either you play the fair fight better, you make that positive affirmative message and try to persuade people, or you lose. Or if you're going to fight dirty and fight ruthlessly, then we should get to fight dirty too. So it's like, for me, I want to tell Republicans either lose the fair fight or lose the unfair fight, one of the two. But you're going to lose, you should lose, or you should try to win fairly. And so I don't look at it as Republicans are escalating because Democrats are escalating. Republicans are escalating by default because they don't see the playground or the arena as favorable to them. I don't know how you stop them from naturally being inclined to escalate. So to me, this goes back to, again, this is the primary responsibility of the Republican Party. It's the primary fault of the Republican Party. And I don't want Democrats to escalate either unless Republicans won't stop. And that's where I'm trying to understand how we get this, because I agree with you. We want to avoid this entropy, but I don't understand how you think that should happen, because as a Democrat, I don't want Democrats to just disarm. I think we put our metaphorical knife down only after Republicans do.
Yeah. There's a lot to say.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think we're sort of locked in this like prisoner's dilemma, right? Where you're pointing at the Republicans and you're saying, look, they're defecting, and the game theoretical optimal solution is to defect as well. Because if we don't defect, if we like cooperate and they defect, then they're going to benefit the most. And then if we defect and they defect, then things will be like worse overall for both of us, but it will be more equal. And that's kind of like your ultimate position. And I think that like we can acknowledge that there's this like economically ideal scenario, like the game theoretical, like optimal strategy. But the thing is that like humans don't operate as if we're like Homo economicus. Like we don't operate in this like perfectly rational realm. There are all sorts of things that we do that are biased and strange and weird and not efficient or rational. And so like earlier we discussed this when we talked about religion. And there's lots of aspects of religion that are very irrational, that are not like the economically, like they don't economically make sense in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But by having like these binding myths, they allow people to come together and to act in ways that like are irrational, but ultimately better for the group. And so this is like partly explanatory of like why religious communities within secular countries or like within developed countries tend to be so much happier than their secular peers, because oftentimes you're able to like engage with this irrationality that allows for like community making. And so I think that on the political level, I think that America needs like a national mythology and a national like virtue to strive for. And I think that like in the past, America had that in a lot of ways. It had a lot of confidence. And so people kind of united around facing off external threats, and they really believed in the American system. And I think we've had a lot of erosion of that belief. People don't believe on the right or the left in the American system anymore. You have communists who want to tear everything down, and you have, you know, Trump fans who are, you know, saying that the election is rigged and cannot exist in a fair way. And I think that, you know, in the future, I have a lot of hope for America, because I think that we will see on a geopolitical level Russia and China kind of being revealed to be paper tigers and will reassert some power. And I think that that's a good opportunity for national myth building. And, this is maybe not like my ideal solution, because I think that you could have better solutions if you were to restructure society to change the incentives. And that's not really something that I think is like plausible on the short-term time scale. Like I can't tell you.
I don't think you and I can pull it off yet.
Yeah, I can't tell you like, well, the solution to this is just like totally reorient the political system. But I do think that like maybe a better solution would be to take like the first steps towards, saying that, what, the American institutions and our political system is good and it's worth defending and it's worth playing fair and fighting honorably, even if it costs us short-term victories. I think that that needs to be the kind of movement that people are willing to take up arms for. And that's something that I'm willing to take up arms for. And so I think it's sometimes frustrating when I see liberals or left-wingers who also seem like so disillusioned and are willing to engage in that kind of political entropy. So that would be kind of my immediate solution, is to not allow yourself to be part of the movement that erodes trust and erodes democracy, but actually fight for a better, more just, more fair political system.
I want to say this. I think that sounds great, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to see how that would. Okay. So in application, I see how that would work for you. You said you would refrain from voting Republican, or you probably wouldn't vote Democrat again, but you would at least refrain from voting Republican, or you'd vote third party. You'd criticize your fellow right wingers. I understand all of that. Let me ask you, what would that look like then? Because I assume that I'm sounding like one of those liberals you're frustrated with. So prescriptively, what would that look like for me?
I think
okay?
that, like, yeah, I'm laughing because
yeah.
It occurred to me to just tell you, like, well, just become a right winger, or just like,
yeah. Okay, well,
but like, no. I think the realistic solution is to just like be one of the Democrats who are willing to like stick up for fair play and for decorum and that kind of thing, even though it's like hard, and even though it is probably going to cost, like maybe in the short term, and like maybe not, because I think that like when Republicans see people who are Democrats and who are saying that like, no, I believe in fighting fair and I believe in like advocating for what is true, I think that's something that really cuts the heart of political bias a lot better. And like, if you want to have conversations with people who are politically different from you, I mean, like one thing that you've done in this conversation that I think is really good is by being like very good faith. Like you didn't, act blood sports or anything. And like, I think you had opportunities to maybe like go in on me and like really state the facts. Like you could have done that. But I think you are willing to have a conversation. And I think that really speaks to like your character. And I've also, in turn been more willing to do that as well. Like not be so blood sports. And so I think that like, that is a good model that you can take into the world with other conversations and, go to Republicans and be like, hey, I'm not one of those Democrats who believes in like engaging in what it takes, whatever it is, to win. I believe in, the truth and advocating for what I think is going to be best for everyone, because I believe the truth can stand on its own. And I think that's a better pitch in a lot of ways.
Certainly if we were in an Aaron Sorkin world, I think that was actually a great impromptu Sorkin speech that you delivered. Like that could have been on the season finale of The West Wing somewhere. That could have come straight from CJ or President Bartlett or whatever. Sidebar, have you watched The West Wing? I
think I watched like season 1, or maybe like season 1 and 2. I'm like familiar with it.
You're familiar with it? Got you. It's the first like 4 seasons, I think, are competitive with anything. It's really good, and it has very high rewatch value.
It is very much like the liberal like.
Oh, I keep forgetting you're not liberal, so I understand that it doesn't appeal nearly as much.
No, but I mean, yeah. I get it. It's very much like you can see the there's like an archetype of a person who's like a fan of West Wing politics, and like that's how they approach politics. So
yeah, I guess I just don't make the mistake of assuming that that's where we are now. And I mean, I do hear what you're saying. But to me, and I guess that I'm gonna have to chew on that part, on that charge of that prescription that you offer as far as what that would look like, because my initial thought is, man, that sounds great, but like that sounds like disarm and encourage my side to disarm while I'm looking and seeing the enemy at the gates, and a bunch of villages on fire behind them, and January 6th and the big lie. And I look at polls where 60% of Republican voters don't think that President Biden was elected legitimately, and 40% believe that violence is like a necessary or may become necessary in the future to resolve election disputes and all these things. I'm seeing that and I'm like, that's a major ask of the side that's basically had its guard up, getting whacked left, right, and center by bad faith Republicans, to basically say, put your arms down and just hope that, they don't hit you. I guess I just don't have my first instinct is, Toph, that I don't have the faith that Republicans will police themselves. The reason I want to have this conversation with you is because I know you're different. I've seen you do it, and I know this is not your preference, but I also think that you represent an extreme minority in your own party, who are more interested in owning the libs and winning at all costs, and that makes me very, very nervous, because the other thing about the Republican Party, I don't see a limiting principle. I genuinely don't. I don't see a point where they're like, you know what? We've pummeled the opposition enough. We're going to ease up. My bad, and we'll help you up. I don't see that. I see that as it is utter dominance that they seek. The limiting principle is complete capitulation by the opposition party, in this case, the Democrats, and that's just not feasible. As a leftist, I don't want Democrats to subordinate themselves to a more bad faith party that doesn't think they can win a fair fight, therefore they're going to escalate. So I do want to think about what you said and see if there's a way to square that. But it's like one of those things that if we both are armed, I need to see your arm drop first, because you've been, not you, but the Republicans have been more trigger happy than my side of the aisle. Does that, again, you don't have to agree, but does that make sense?
I do think it makes sense. So I think it's a very hard pitch, right? Like what I'm giving, which is saying that like basically you need to be willing to be like among the first to take a risk and to like stand for, a commitment to, not playing dirty. I think that's a very hard pitch, because like you're right that it does mean, or it could mean losing. And so like nobody wants to be among the first people to do that, because it is kind of like bringing, or like not bringing a knife to a fight. Or it's like, I think it's similar in a lot of ways to like nonviolent protests. Like it's very dangerous.
Are you a Star Wars fan?
I don't know if I would say so.
Oh.
Do you have like a great allegory? Because
I was going to say, at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Luke defeats Vader in single combat and the Emperor is encouraging him to strike his father down.
Yeah.
Instead, Luke throws away the lightsaber and faces death, but is then rescued by his father.
Yeah, very much. Like you need to be willing to like not exercise power, or to like, be concerned a little bit more with like the long term rather than like the short term victory. Because like really what I'm concerned about is like the future of America, not just in the 4 or 8 years into the future, but like long past when I die, and like what is that going to look like? Are we going to be in a better world? And I think that like the way that you get to that is by having the courage to be among the first people who say, I'm not going to play these games, but I'm going to stand for something more.
Yeah. I genuinely want to chew on that. I told you my first instincts are what they are, and certainly, again, in terms of interpersonal conversations like this, I'm perfectly willing to be much more generous and openly concede the Democrats many legion of failures along the way.
And I think
Um,
that's like, I think that's so admirable. And it's made me like really enjoy talking to you. And so I think that like, you say these things that like, well, Democrats need to be willing to fight dirty. But like on some level, like you are not doing that. Like you are fighting fair and like you are willing to have a very good conversation. And so I think that's like kind of an interesting dynamic where like in some sense you are sticking to like this principle of truth and honesty and good faith, and we see in the conversation that we're having now like the benefit of that, because I definitely feel like at least a little bit more open to your viewpoint and your ideas.
I think it's because that I don't have any power platform to speak of. I mean,
Mm.
certainly, to whatever extent you do, and Destiny and Vosh and all these people, and then you ratchet it all the way up to, actual power players in politics, the Kamala Harris's, the Mitch McConnell's, the Joe Biden's, whatever. It's all stratified. If I think if I were a a sitting member of Congress, or the president's chief of staff, I would be encouraging. It would basically be, to borrow another analogy, but we'll use history this time. Sherman's march to the sea, General Sherman's march to the sea during the Civil War. That helped break the back of the Confederacy. And sometimes, at least, and war might be the absolute wrong metaphor for your sensibilities personally, because you don't want to look at it that way. But I think in many ways we are, unfortunately, in a political and ideological war where it's not just a formal debate or a disagreement. There's no statesmanship. It is a genuine and often mutually intense dislike of these sides, and it is about conquest. And very often we have used ruthless means to cow an otherwise implacable enemy. And I feel that that's where we are. It's not where I want us to be. But I'm also saying that from the position, I've had conversations with other conservatives before, who have gotten on to me for advocating for Democrats fighting dirtier and being willing to lie and willing to, negative campaign ads and spinning facts and just being, breaking and bending norms when convenient to play the Republican game. I've had good conservatives get really upset with me over that, because they're like, you are advocating for making it worse. And my response is, yeah, but you're rewarding the act. You are upset with me for encouraging people to do bad, but you are actively rewarding bad by voting for Trump and voting for Republicans. So in my mind, you're the one doing the thing that's worse, and you just don't want to lose your advantage. I guess I have conversations with conservatives who get upset with what I advocate for, because they don't want to lose their advantage. No, I don't want Democrats to fight dirty. You're saying that from the position of privilege of your side's already fighting dirty, and it's not in your best interest for the other side to start doing it too. Um, and that's kind of like the thing that I wrestle with. So I try for interpersonal conversation. I try to be of good faith. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I do get in blood sports mentality. I don't know if I could have this conversation with Rob, for example. I'd
Might be
love to
hard.
have a conversation with Rob, but
That'd be cool. I'd
um,
like to see that.
yeah, but no, I do appreciate it. Just a couple of things. I don't know how much longer you have left, but what do you want to see from the January 6th hearings? I don't know if you've
Oh,
even been following them, but what outcome would you like to see here, honestly?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that like, and there's like in an ideal world, I think that it would probably deal like a serious blow to the Republican desire to like erode institutions, and sort of like reveal people who are involved in that to be like untrustworthy and, fraudsters and worthy of not being followed. And so I think that would probably be ideal, but I don't think that's like very realistic. I don't think that's going to be the outcome.
Do you hope it encourage? I guess are you fine with? Do you want, or would you oppose rather the Department of Justice charging, prosecuting, and potentially convicting at the end of this, like President Trump and Ted Cruz or whoever? How would you feel about that?
I'm not sure. I mean, I have trust in the Department of Justice and the powers that be to like come to a good, a good and just conclusion. I would be like I'd be quite worried about kind of overstating things or like going too far. I think it's like a scary precedent when you start like locking people up, especially when they're like your political rivals, and that could very easily be an escalation. So to the degree that which there is justice, I think it really needs to be proportioned to the risk of like a serious attempt happening in the future or being orchestrated by the same people. So I think like if evidence came out that like Trump was like seriously trying to orchestrate a coup and had intentions to do that in the future, I think that would be like a good example of proving that he's like a real threat to things in a way that like maybe warrants jail. I don't know if that bar has been met yet though.
If there wasn't evidence that he intended to do it again,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that his actions, his dishonesty, his role in inciting what happened, from just a rhetorical or spiritual, perspective, if the Department of Justice is confident that they can charge and prosecute for a crime, that it was a crime, and they can successfully make the case, would you support them doing that even if they had no evidence that Trump would do it again in the future? Like it would just be to punish him for what he did in the past.
Yeah, I mean, like if it was a crime, I don't know. I would say I'm conflicted on that. I think it's hard to tell because, like, in 99% of cases, like if it's a crime, the obvious answer is like prosecute them and jail them. The only reason I think that there's like maybe should be some leniency is just because like it's so dangerous to begin locking people up if they're your political rivals, especially if you don't think that they're going to be like a legitimate threat to like the institutions of the country in the future. And so I might say that like if you are, sure that it's just like there was bad
there's
dealing.
There's no way to be sure.
But in your hypothetical, you said that, right?
Well, no, I mean they wouldn't be sure that he wouldn't do it again. They would just have no evidence. They wouldn't know. Because there's no way to prove, right? I know for a fact this person will never do it again. They just have no evidence of potential recidivism.
And I think like what I'm trying to communicate maybe is that like the greater risk is like a present and ongoing conspiracy to engage in that. So like if you could like indict on that, I think that would, hit a lot harder than being like,
I agree.
Yeah, like, he engaged in like irresponsible rhetoric and then acted like, a child and was not able to denounce his supporters afterwards.
I understand that'd be the stronger case, but as far as like if that case couldn't be made, do you think if the Department of Justice says, "Hey, look, what he did was a crime, and we believe confidently that we can charge and successfully prosecute because of that crime. We have no evidence that he'll ever do it again in the future. He may or he may not. We have no evidence either way. This would be just to punish him for a crime he committed." Would you support the Department of Justice pursuing that?
I would lean on the side of yes, but just like with the caveats that I
Sure.
give.
There's this idea that after, when President Lincoln was assassinated, it really threw back Reconstruction because, his successor was a Southern sympathizer who went easy on former Confederate states and former Confederate leadership, and that has ultimately contributed to, the resurgent, like the rebel flag and the resurgence of like Confederate sympathies in the South. Do you think that there's a lesson to be learned there with MAGA in the sense like we saw at the end of the Civil War, the victorious Union really didn't punish those that attempted, to destroy the country. Do you think that there's a logic to we shouldn't make that mistake with those involved with January 6th, that no, we do need to throw the book at them as long as we can make the case persuasively that we're not just trumping up pun intended charges, but we're not going to offer clemency this time. It's, we're going to hit you if we're going to pursue charges if they can be made. As a broad question, would you err on the side of no, for the cohesiveness we need to show leniency, or no, to heal we need to remove the infection and so they should be punished?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a legitimate like line of argumentation. There's a phrase called like grasping the nettle, which is like, it comes from this old British saying that like, if you want to pluck a nettle, if you gently do it, you'll cover your hand in barbs. But if you grasp tightly, you'll crush them and you won't be hurt by it.
Yeah.
And so I think that sometimes you are put in a political situation where if you are very gentle in something, you'll end up hurting yourself. But if you are able to act, quickly and decisively, you actually create like better outcomes in the long run.
Sure.
And so I think that like one example of this would be like if you have like a rebel group in your country and you want to be very gentle, you want to win them over intellectually, and so you allow the rebel group to like put forth members to your democratic institutions. You allow them to like engage in like free rhetoric, and all the while like other members of the group are engaging in terrorism. I think that would be an example of like really failing to stamp out a ideological enemy that threatens like existentially your democratic institutions. And so if you want democratic institutions, you first need to secure like through force a peaceful like even playing field where everyone who's engaging in the institutions already believes in some way in them and isn't like engaging to destroy them. So I think that like the reason I bring this up is because I think that like if Trump is really engaging in like an attempt to destroy institutions, like an existential threat to them, then I think it's appropriate to like grasp the nettle and to strike down hard. And if that's not the case, I don't think that like you need to grasp the nettle, and I don't think that he's an existential threat. And what I lean on is I don't think that he is an existential threat. So I don't know if you need to like crush him totally. And I don't think that we're like beyond the point at which we can appeal to some cohesion. And so I think that like we need to be careful in the ways that we distribute justice in order not to, inflame things.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly it's a bit of a catch-22. A lot of people have written about it.
But it's like so hard, right? Which is like why maybe I come off as like Weasley, is because like I ultimately don't know what like the better solution is, and all I can do is like work through the logic of like, well, if this is the case, then maybe that would be the better thing. But like ultimately, I'm going to hope that like the Department of Justice makes the right call, and I'm going to trust that they can make that call much better than I can as like a 20-year-old, online sex worker who talks about politics.
21, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, 21.
21. Oh, and by the way, so you said that was a British expression?
I think so, yeah. That's where I've heard of it.
So could you actually like say it in a British accent? I'm just curious. How's your British accent?
Terrible. I cannot do accents at all.
Is it? Okay. No, I mean, look, I mean, I appreciate that answer. Obviously, as a leftist, my answer is throw the book at President Trump and the Trump high command. But I also know that there is a risk involved, a potential backlash that it would be seen as, politically motivated and whatnot. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a way. I don't think there's a way for Attorney General Garland or President Biden or the Department of Justice to ever. There is no way to punish President Trump, even if the case could be made, in such a way that would persuade 30% of the country. 30% of the country to 35 would believe it was a political witch hunt.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's a sufficient reason not to do it. I think, and I'm actually there again, kind of frustrated, brings us full circle back with the Republicans because they had the chance within the party to do what Senator Goldwater did with President Nixon and stop him themselves and say, look, resign or you will be successfully impeached and convicted and you'll never be able to run for office again, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And they didn't. They were too cowardly to do it. And so now punishment falls on the Department of Justice and there's a great risk there. But look, I don't want to eat up too much more of your time. I really appreciate the conversation. I'm sorry we didn't get too far into because there's so much to talk about. I was going to try to make an affirmative case for Democrats, and hopefully I'll be able to do that with you, eventually. But I really enjoyed this conversation. You lived up to how you were on Hippy Dippy and in conversations with Vosh and Destiny. And I hope that you're on there more often because you're a good counterweight to Rob.
I'm glad. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I thought it was really enjoyable.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much. Hope you have a good rest of your stream.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, rum1n8.
Bye.
That was really good. I really enjoyed that. I think it was kind of a slow start for me to really get into it because I wasn't sure what the tone of the conversation would be. But by the end there, I think it got pretty comfortable and pretty fun. I think I went into it more hot than I meant to, and then had to kind of pull back and be like, all right, we're gonna try to really make a good faith case for these sorts of things. Ooh. So I'm happy with that. I'll probably try to talk to him again. I thought that went really well. I also want to talk to, oh God, who else? Dev. I had a really great stream with Short Fat Otaku yesterday. Or was it yesterday? Maybe the day before. Might have been Wednesday, yeah. That was really good. So guys should check that out. That's on my YouTube channel. Or no, it's on his YouTube channel. Sorry. Because I didn't stream it. Although I'm thinking, I just didn't because I was too tired. I was I don't want to stream. I'll just have a conversation. But I was getting really positive feedback from this community, so that's good. Good stuff, guys. I'm probably going to end the stream there. More about tone than content. No, I thought the content was good. I did think I went in a little hot, yeah. Well, I feel like it was really good because by the end of it, he was like, I really do need to think about that, which is it's the best thing you can hear in an argument of interesting, I'll think about that. Because I don't know, that's always what I'm going for is, maybe I'll think about that. But yeah, good stuff. I'm gonna end the stream for now. Love you. Best. Incredible. Amazing. It was good.